following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. The Comfortably Zoned Radio Network presents The Gall of the Man. And now, the galling man himself, Ralph Zig Tyko.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am indeed the man with the gall, Ralph Tyko, coming to you from Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco in the northern part of the greatest state in the country, I think. I may get some argument on that, but I have as a return guest someone who's not going to argue. He's in another part of the state, California, but Southern California. And I love having him on. He is just a wealth of eclectic stuff. You have done so much, Jack O'Halloran, in your life. Thank you for being a regular on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Good. You are forthcoming in your in everything you do. Let's put it that way. And you've taught me an awful lot about your background and cleared up a lot of misconceptions as to what organized crime as we know it was about. No secret, your family legacy, as you refer to it as, you're a made man. You're the son of Albert Anesthesia. And I can't even pronounce it right, and you are. So you're amazingly we're about the same age. We're in our 70s. And the reason I enjoy talking to you so much is that you have a clear idea of what the changes have been in this country since we were kids. And you express it so beautifully. So I'm going to delve into something that I've never asked you about. You were a professional fighter. You were involved with some people when you were fighting that were your family, the familia. And I want to ask you how gambling is going to affect the Super Bowl coming up.
I don't think it's going to affect it at all. I mean, it's those days are not as prevalent as they were years ago. You don't have as many things. I think it's more. It was an interesting deal that happened with the New Orleans Saints game. And someone brought something to light, which should have probably been addressed before, was that 4 of the refs in the game were from L.A. And one ref is standing right there looking straight at the play. It was not 5 feet away, and never called that foul, which was totally uncalled for. Just, for me as an athlete, and for a lot of people as an athlete, there's just no excuse for that whatsoever. And that was a game changer. But you can turn around, you can say, well, that's football, and that's sport, and all that, and all those cliches are wonderful to say. But the bottom line is, it was absolutely a game changer. New Orleans would be in the Super Bowl today had that man called that foul. Case closed, So I can see a lot of the anger and a lot of things that people say, but that had nothing to do with what used to happen years ago, where someone would get paid or, somebody would have a conversation with somebody and different things would happen, points. There was a lot of college shaving of points years ago. There was a lot of pros shaving of points. A lot of things that happened. People were overmatched and different deals like that. But that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen as much as it did years ago.
Okay. Now, when it did happen years ago, were some of the people that they that the people that needed to control things, or however you want to put it, did they not only go to players to shave points and what have you, but did they go to officials? Was it prevalent?
It was across the board. I'm not going to point names at anybody or anything, but it was across the board, and it had to be that way. You couldn't just have it on one side. It had to be a package control deal.
Okay. As just a few years ago, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, there was an NBA ref that it came out that he was indeed controlling the over and under, and that was kind of glossed over. Do you remember that instance?
It gets glossed over because nobody, listen. There's a lot of people that are never going to say, "Hey, I was a part of that." There's a lot of people don't want to believe that they allowed themselves to be a part of that. People are, when it comes to honesty inside of what person does, there's very few people that are capable of being truly honest with themselves as to their actions and things that they do. And it goes to an old, it's like an old cliche that people used to use it. Money talks and bullshit walks, and people put money on the table. People get funny when it comes to money, period. They do funny things, and that's across the board. I don't care where you are in life. Temptation is an amazing situation,
In any part of life. It doesn't have to be sports. It could be politics. It could be anything, of course. Big business.
Absolutely.
Jack, there's one game in my fandom that stands out because it was the 1968-69 season, and the New York Jets in what wasn't even considered to be a Super Bowl then. It was a league championship. And they played what I consider to be a vastly superior team going in with the Colts. There was a book written by Jimmy Breslin, and I don't remember the name of the book.
I love Jimmy. Jimmy was a trip.
Pardon me?
Jimmy Breslin was a trip. I knew him well.
Really? Okay. Was there anything in that game? I think he referred to Bubba Smith was playing there. If you remember,
you're talking about when they first interfaced the AFL and the NFL, and
right. The game gave credence to making the American League
they
took
the they took the AFL guys. It's like playing a team that you take for granted and think you can just walk all over them, and then they run into Joe Willie Namath, and the Jets had a very good football team. There's no two ways about it. And Joe Willie Namath was an exceptional
and Snell and a terrific defensive line and linebackers. Those guys.
Joe Willie could throw the ball. He was a great ball player. He had some great receivers, and they played a great football game that day. And there's no two ways about it.
Shula had Johnny Unitas sitting on the bench for a long time. And there's a picture in my mind, and remember, I'm a Jet fan, so I never wanted to believe any of this. But there's a picture in my mind of Jimmy Orr standing in the end zone, waving frantically, never got the ball thrown to him. Would you say that there's even the small possibility that's given the consequences, the merging of the league, Al Davis involved as the commissioner, was there a strong possibility that there might not, or a small possibility even, that it may not have been totally on the up and up?
The Jets-Baltimore game?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't believe that. I mean, and Baltimore is a mafia city. I knew a lot of good people down there, and they did a lot of crazy stuff. But I don't believe that game was tainted at all. And I think that you're just coming up with a group of kids that wanted to win. You had some ball players that knew how they could play. Joe Willie but no one expected him to be, because he didn't play in the NFL. He took a lot. Joe Willie was the highest paid quarterback, the highest paid ball player in the league at the time, both leagues. Nobody made more money than him. He's the one that set the precedent for huge salaries. I think he got $400,000 or something like that, which is unheard of. You understand? The only guy I knew that got paid probably more money than that, but he got paid in different ways, was Billy Cannon, who played for the Houston Oilers. And Billy Cannon got
an orthodontist in his life, if I'm not mistaken.
Billy runs Louisiana today. Billy's a good guy. I like Billy a lot.
Okay, when you say he runs Louisiana, I know what you mean.
Yeah, he was groomed by Carlos himself. He was very close to Carlos, and Billy was a great athlete at LSU, and he was a great running back. And when he went into the Houston Oilers, he got paid a lot of money, but they gave him also a string of gas stations.
Really?
He had a whole string of gas stations in different states that were given to him.
The number one draft choice the year the league was formed.
That's correct.
And he really made the difference in making the league legitimate in people.
Oh, he was a great ball player. But he took a lot of play. He was a great running back. And then he got hurt, and he wound up at Oak. I think he finished up in Oakland playing tight end, which I thought was criminal. I thought that was criminal. But he was a great athlete. He was a great ball player. I mean, God, when he was at LSU, he set the lights on fire down there. He could run. I mean, he ran a 9.300. He was a trip, and he's a really nice person. He's an accountant down in Louisiana.
Wasn't he a dentist for a while, or?
He's an accountant. He went to jail for a while, and then he came out.
He did go to jail, but I thought it was he was a dentist. I don't know.
He's an accountant, and he never lost any of his licenses or anything. Went away for a little bit, came home, and everything was intact. He didn't lose anything. He's a real nice fellow. He's a good guy.
Good to hear that.
When you're talking about games like that, like the Jets game, it's just that everyone assumed that Baltimore would run them off the field because it's the Baltimore Colts, and they had Bubba Smith, and they had John. I mean, John Unitas was one of the toughest ball players, quarterbacks. Him and Bobby Lane were amazingly tough ball players. John Unitas one time, and this goes back just to show how all this clarity of who gets hurt today and how much emphasis they put on injuries and all that jazz. I played in football with when we had single bars across our helmets. You understand? And I remember John Unitas once.
Bobby Lane played with no bars.
No bars. Right. But John Unitas got hit one time and knocked out his front teeth. And he reached down and picked up a handful of grass sod, and shoved it up inside the hole to stop the bleeding because he didn't want to come off the field.
Whoa.
You understand?
Oh.
Today, these guys have been taken off in stretchers or something like that happened to them. I mean,
absolutely.
John was an incredible ball. Bobby Lane. The funniest story I ever heard about Bobby Lane was Bobby Lane was playing. I think they were playing against Chicago or somebody, and a defensive lineman was just, I forget, the guy was a good ball player, was just crashing through the line and getting to him all the time. So he yelled at his lineman. He said, "You can't block this guy." He said, Bobby, there's nothing, I can't. He said, okay, here's the deal. Let him come this time. He said, what? He said, let him in. Let him come. And this guy comes charging at Bobby Lane. He threw a spiral and hit him smack between the eyes with it. That was the end of that guy. He carried off the field. You know, these guys were different. It was a different breed of football in those days. There was no blowing the whistles of fouls and all that jazz for stuff like that. I mean, guys played hurt all the time.
There was no taxi squad as we know it, or no disabled list.
Remember the Green Bay Packers with Lombardi? They had a guard by the name of Kramer, great ball player, right? He had an appendectomy done and went back on the field 2 days later to play football because he wouldn't miss a game for Lombardi.
Made Lombardi and his wife very happy.
I mean, you're talking about some, dedication and seriousness to the game. I mean, guys like Bednarik who played both ways. Doug Atkins was one of the greatest defensive ends that I ever saw. I mean, he was an amazing big guy. Never lifted a barbell, never lifted a weight. He was just a naturally strong country boy who loved to play football. These guys loved the game. I mean, they would play with broken bones. I remember Pete Retzlaff, who played end for the Eagles, played with a cast. He had a double fracture in his arm. He said, I'm not missing a game. Played with a cast on his arm.
Well, the fellow that comes to mind is a Bronx guy, Artie Donovan, when you were talking about that Baltimore team. Artie Donovan was one of the all-time characters in the NFL. Did you get to meet him at all?
No, I knew who he was, but I never did get to meet him, no. I knew who he was, though.
Growing up at my grandparents' house in the Bronx, when his name came up, everybody would say, Bronx boy, Bronx boy.
Well, that was, neighborhood kids. I mean, it's like, remember Tommy McDonald?
I do. He was like 5'8", and
Tommy McDonald was one of the toughest little kids. I mean, I said to him one time, he used to get hit. I mean, really get hit. They used to zero in on him, and he'd just jump right up off the ground. I said,
right.
And I asked him one day, I said, Tommy, don't you ever feel it? He said, what I learned when I was in Oklahoma, he said, I learned to just fold up like a pretzel. He said, you just give in to the flow of it, man, and don't fight it, and it doesn't hurt you as much. And he's right. He's dead right. It's like
Jack,
riding
from a personal standpoint, which did you enjoy more, football or boxing? Was it the team camaraderie or that you liked more, or was it I'm in here alone, I'm the man?
All right, see, I love football, but I love boxing because just that, you're alone. You're on your own. When that bell rings, there's only two sports that you're dead on your own, that there's no replacements for you. And that's swimming and boxing. When you dive in that pool, you're on your own, son. And when that bell rings, you're on your own. There ain't no timeouts. Nobody. If you pull your shoulder out, if you break something, it's up to you. You quit or you just fight on. You're on your own.
We've been talking a long time. This was the first week I looked at some of your YouTube clips, fighting Foreman, for instance. My God, you were good. I mean,
well, they premature the Foreman fight. That was a trip. First of all, I only trained 2 weeks for the fight, and Foreman. They got the Foreman fight because no one would fight me after I knocked out Manuel Ramos. So I had to sit on a shelf for a couple months. So I got busy doing stuff in the street and doing other things, and then all of a sudden I get a phone call. You want to fight George Foreman in the Garden? And And they almost didn't even let, it's a trip. I went to the Garden to go into the fight, and they almost didn't let me in because I had given my tickets to San Margol's to give to somebody else to go into the fight. And the guy said, I said, I'm fighting Foreman tonight. The guy said, you gotta have a ticket. I said, well, does that mean I go home? Are you people nuts or what? I had a hard time getting in the Garden. It was a crazy, crazy deal. And they stopped the fight very quick, and George would never fight me again. And I told him, and George and I became good friends. And I said to him, he said, I got to tell you one thing, Jack. Probably 4 guys that hit me the hardest in my life, you're in the top 4.
Wow.
And he was glad they stopped the fight because, it was you do what you got to do. You know what I mean? Was
it a big deal to you? This is Madison Square Garden, and if anybody didn't grow up in New York, and if you weren't a boxing fan or a sports fan, the significance of Madison Square Garden. When you went into the Garden and right before the fight started, did you just take a moment of self-reflection and say, I'm fighting in Madison Square Garden? What was that like in your head? Because
I got to tell you, you want me to tell you the truth?
What were you, 23, 24?
Yeah, 24 years old. Actually, I was 24, 25. The things that I had done so many things in my life, and boxing, one of the things that a lot of decisions that I lost in different cities and stuff because you're fighting in people's backyards never bothered me that much because I didn't really want the notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
Because of other things that I was doing. Yeah, you understand? It's kind of a hard thing to explain to people sometimes, but, there was it was either, when I got close to fighting for the title, it dawned on me that how much publicity and stuff like that and how much your name is, and, that's probably why the reason I had about 25 fights that you would call like smoker fights that were never even on my record. I've got 25 knockouts that I had up through New England and Maine. Sam Silverman and his partner used to run boxing shows everywhere. So we used to drive around and everybody went to different shows and they'd say, Jack, you got your shoes and stuff? I'd say, well, we're lacking about. Would you fight? I said, well, you got to buy management name. Well, you fight under another name. I said, no problem. So I would do it because it's like a gym workout. You understand?
And it's a
payday. Not any money. I mean, there was no money in boxing in those days. When I started boxing, you got $10 a round. So if you didn't love the sport, there's no way you would have ever stayed in it. Although I got paid by a syndicate, they paid me every week, and I had other things that I did that made money. Boxing was like a day job,
Right.
But I would take a fight on a week's notice because I was just a tough kid,
Now, what you mentioned on a show a while back, I don't remember if it was the Peter Golenbach show that you were on or one of the shows with me. You mentioned that when you were playing what amounted to be semi-pro football because your class hadn't graduated.
Well, that was the rules in those days. There were no hardship cases. You couldn't play pro ball until your class graduated. I still think it should be that way today because I think these guys go in too young, their bodies aren't matured enough, and they get injured. That's why I think a lot of these injuries come from, to be honest.
Well, you had the young body, and you were playing 2 games a week?
Yeah.
Whoa. They talk about a short week when a team has to play on a Thursday night.
And that's playing both ways.
And you were playing both ways in 2 games a week.
Yeah. I just love the game.
Right. What position did you play offensively? I assume you were a defensive tackle or
Offensive tackle and sometimes offensive end. You know, it would vary. But I play defensive, all defensive end. Sometimes I play offensive end and offensive tackle.
Was it not just the money? Was it an emotional decision to give up football to go into boxing at all?
It was an emotional thing altogether. It was, I didn't like, I mean, you know, my heart, I loved football. And when I saw this guy trade away a championship football team, it got, I saw that football was becoming more of a business. You understand? And
well, this was in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And you had gone down there to play for this guy. And,
I went down to play because there was a lot of great talent on that team that I knew, and the owner was a good kid, Jerry Wallman. I kind of liked him. In fact, I liked him a lot. I mean, Eddie Snyder was his partner. Eddie Snyder had the Flyers. They built the Spectrum in Philadelphia. Jerry was a construction guy, and he was a Pennsylvania kid, and I liked him. And, you know, he and I got on well, and he asked me to come down and play. He asked me if I would come and play down there, and I said, yeah. I said, well, yeah, okay, because I knew a lot of ball players that were down there. And then when he hired Q Harrick, and then I found out later years on that he was forced to take Q Harrick, which was a sad deal, you know, that he was bamboozled into it. And Q Harrick wasn't the greatest coach in the world, pal. He was a college coach that, you know, and I found out that, you know, Pete Rozelle, who was the commissioner of football, went to San Francisco University, I think, or San Francisco College, and got a football scholarship from a guy named Joe Q Harrick, and he never played.
Oh. Didn't know.
Understand? So you got one favorite. See, there you go with your favoritisms again, all right? One favorite to another. So Rozelle told Jerry Wallman, you can have the franchise, but you got to take Joe Q Harrick as a coach. Well, he didn't have a right to do that. But that was the deal that he put on the table for Wallman.
Right.
And that, to me, was bull, because there was, I mean, who traded Sonny Jurgensen away, for God's sake? And Tommy McDonald at the same time. Traded both of them to Washington for Norman Snead, who was a third-string quarterback, you know? I mean, anything away from Norman, he wasn't a great ball player. Nice guy, but he wasn't a great football player. And then you lost half of the line, and you lost half of. I mean, guys were going here, there. He traded 4 guys to Green Bay for Jim Ringo, who was over the hill. He traded. I mean, God, man, he went.
There's a great story about Jim Ringo leaving Green Bay. It was back in the days when nobody had player agents, and Jim Ringo walks in to Lombardi's office, and he says, I have an agent that wants to negotiate my contract. And Lombardi says, we'll give him a call tomorrow. Tomorrow he called him and said Jim Ringo was traded in that trade that you mentioned to Washington.
He went to Philadelphia.
Well, I'm sorry, to Philadelphia. Yes. So it was a different day and age in terms of player representation. The management really had a hold of the players in those days. And, you know, if you compare it to Major League Baseball.
Well, it was a different, okay, let me say this to you. When I was going to play in Philly, yeah, I think the contract that we were doing was, I think I was getting $2,500 a week.
Whoa.
That's no money, and that's what linemen got. All linemen.
That's no guarantee either. I mean,
no.
You're almost week to week. Let alone
no, if you got hurt, you were in trouble.
Right.
So it was a whole different scenario. So what I'm saying is that people play because they loved the game. They played because they loved the game. You know, it was a different – athletes had a whole different mentality about it. That's why people, when they look at athletes and they, this guy is so great and that guy is so great, I'll tell you something. Greatest athlete I ever saw in my entire life, and I wish to God I had had a chance to have been in his time era to know him, was Jim Thorpe.
Whoa.
Jim Thorpe was the greatest all-around athlete anyone ever laid their eyes on. Nothing in sports that this guy ever did was not great. He was a one-man track team. Pop Warner. He gave Pop Warner his name. Pop Warner went to the Carlisle Indian School and coached track where Thorpe went to the Olympics. It was like a handful of Indians that went in the Olympic team. Thorpe ran sprints. He threw the shot put. He high jumped. He broad jumped. He did it all. He did it all. And he ran the 100.
Point is, he's
and the 100. Hold it. He ran the 100 under 10 when they had cinder tracks and no great shoes or anything of that nature. And he ran the 100, the 220, the quarter mile, the mile. I mean, he was an amazing athlete. And football, he changed the rules of football because of the way he played. And baseball, and there's where he got in trouble. When he was in college, one summer, some clown came to him and said, "Wow, Jimmy," because he used to work on the farm pitching hay and stuff in the summertime to make money to go to school in between semesters. And they said, "Well, you know what? Why do you pitch hay? We'll give you $75 to play baseball." He never thought that he was doing anything illegal. Nobody ever turned around and said to him, "You can't do that." And that's when they took away when he won every Olympic medal and he was considered the greatest Olympic champion and all that stuff, and they stripped him of all of his titles over that $75 because he was an American Indian. You hear what I'm telling you?
Yes, I do.
Now, I know that for a fact because in the 70s, I was in Oklahoma, and I got very close to his daughter, and I helped him get his medals back. But they gave them back to the family, but they never gave the recognition back to him.
Yeah,
the guy was the greatest athlete ever to walk on any field.
He'd been deceased by then, am I correct?
Yeah. Oh, he was dead, long gone.
Okay.
He died of alcoholism, unfortunately.
Wow.
Which is
how did you help get his family's?
I did some friends, friends for friends, and we just moved around, and we were close. In those days, politically, we were well in tune, pal.
Right.
And we got the governor of Oklahoma and some other people to just say, this is bullshit, and went to the Olympic Committee. And he got all his medals back. They gave all his medals and everything back to the family, and his daughter was so appreciative. The Sac and Fox Indians, who are now today very wealthy because of oil, but, they were a poor Indian tribe. And Thorpe, here's a tricky part about Thorpe. Let me tell you something.
These Indian tribes are doing very well with casinos.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you, it's a funny story. Thorpe's uncle and his father, they used to take him by buckboard 20 miles to go and drop him off at school when he was a kid because they wanted him to get an education. Yeah? They would drop him off. They would take him all the way up there, drop him off, and by the time they got home again, he'd be sitting in the front yard. He ran all the way back home.
Wow.
He used to do that every day. This guy was such an athlete. I mean, I would love to have known him. I swear to God. To me, He was the greatest athlete that this country ever saw. And he'll never get the recognition for it. I mean, they did the movie with Burt Lancaster, the All-American, which was a great film.
Did he make it to the majors as a baseball player as well?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He played professional baseball. He played professional football. Anything he wanted to do, he did.
Well, he was the Jack O'Halloran of his time.
Oh, he was a much better athlete than I was. Let me tell you, the guy was just amazing.
No,
amazing.
Well, he may have been a much better athlete than you, but I can't imagine it being by much. Pro football, boxing contender, and what gets me is, like you told Peter, and that really stood out to me the other day, you didn't box at all as an amateur.
No. I don't think I'm one of 10. And you know what I did? When I got retired, you know, and what I did to show that the skill that I did know about was I took a young kid, Frankie Lyles, and I made him super middleweight champ of the world. I started Freddie Roach.
Really?
Freddie Roach? Freddie Roach was living Freddie Roach was living in Mickey Rourke's gym at the time, and when I took Frankie Lyles down there, and I put a corner together, Freddie Roach and a Mexican kid, and you know, we had a lot of fun. And I took this kid in 6 months. I made him a world champion. Well, I took him and I trained him, and I took him in my house. And I used to run. I had a place called a canyon, Runyon Canyon, which was right by my house on Mulholland Drive. And every morning, I got this kid in the greatest shape he was ever in his life. And he beat Michael Nunn. We went right down the list: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, boom, with the top super middleweights in the world, and he beat them all.
Wow. Did you get as much satisfaction out of doing that as you did doing your own trip? Or
no, it was an explanation point for me to show that I knew what I was talking about. You know, that I could fight. I knew how to fight. I showed this kid how to fight, and I taught him something that an old timer taught me. And moving side to side in half steps, and you didn't have to jump all over the place to do this and that. And you know, and it was what I should have done. I was able to portray into another human being, and it gave Freddie a great basis of how to train fighters. And look at the champions he's come up with. And he did that because of what he and I, you know, he watched me with Frankie Lyles. And I never talk about that much. You know, that's part of my life. And I did it when I remember going home and saying to my wife, you know, I think I'm going to make a kid world champion. She said, oh, good, it'll give you something to do.
Yeah, it's like I love you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. You know?
No, it was good. It worked out very well, and you know, it was we traveled all over the world with him. We fought in Ecuador. We fought in Argentina. We fought all over the place.
Okay. Tell me about your projects.
In London, it was Fight of the Year, Knockout of the Year.
Right. Jack, tell me more about the book projects that you have. One book,
Family Legacy. Family Legacy.
So to speak.
Family Legacy is a terrific book, and we're getting ready to do 3 more. I'm going to do all the sequels, and I'm going to bring in everything up right to date about where all the families are, what they're doing, and you know what the truisms are. You know how we're still benefiting society, and how you know the real familia are not in the drug business. They still appall that business. Unfortunately, some of the young kids that were derivatives of, you know, just ran for the money, and they got greedy, and you know, they forgot how to make money, and they took a shortcut, and that's sad. You know, it's just, but we're trying to turn some things around, and I think they will turn around. I see. So one of the things I love about Trump is that he's bringing industry back into the country. He's going to make things work a lot better for people. There'll be more validity, I think, in the unions. I think some of the things, but that's going to take time. You can't. Sometimes, there's like 30 years of garbage that went on, and it's going to take a while to turn some of the stuff around. And this guy's being crucified, and people should look at what he's actually doing for the country and for the poor and for a lot of people. But by bringing industry back into the country and creating jobs and creating some kind of clarity as to where people can go with their lives.
Let me just say something about that. When you say bringing in jobs and people are working, 99% workforce, since Reagan screwed up the unions, a job isn't defined as it used to be. You could work 40 hours a week and you have a job, but you're the working poor. They describe a person who works 40 hours and doesn't make enough money to have a family, to support himself, to buy a car, to buy a house, this, that, and the other thing. So I think it's a false economy, Jack. I think that things are...
Well, there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. And this happened in the last,
20 years, maybe.
Yeah, 4 presidents. The last 20 years, things have changed so badly that, and here's the reason why. A very simple statement is that keeping people poor controls them better, because they have to ask the government for help all the time. That's what they feel, and that's nothing but communism, socialism. That's just making people depend on the government, which is not what America's about.
Jack, there's a clear distinction between communism and socialism.
Well, everybody says that. I've dealt with the real deal. I've been in Russia. I've been in places, and I've dealt with real people that live both sides of the stick. Socialism is a manner of living which in some places it works. Some places it actually works, okay? Mm-hmm. But it's not for America. And communism is a control factor. And,
well, you can have socialism and socialistic aspects of your philosophy. Like, does socialism work with the police? Does it work with the libraries, with the garbage collectors? That's all socialism.
Well, you're spreading a word. Socialism in its meaning is that you are dependent on a government to control all the aspects of your life, and that's not good. And socialism came in with welfare. Welfare created socialism because what it did was it separated people. And here's how it separated people. When I was a kid, when you were a kid, if you needed something, you went to a neighbor. Or a neighbor was always there to help another. People in the neighborhood always helped each other. If something happened in your house or this or that, somebody was always there. If you needed $20 or you needed $50, there was always a neighbor that had money that lent somebody $50 or $20. When they came in with welfare, all of a sudden people became a number. And they went to the state for whatever they needed. They stopped talking to their neighbors.
Okay.
It separated people. Whether you like to believe that or not, that's true. It separated people.
Okay.
No?
I'll go along with that, but and I will also copy the fact that there's been welfare abuse. But you know who abuses welfare more than anyone? And I'll just throw the name Sam Walmart, right? Sam, whatever his name is, who runs Walmart. He pays his workers just enough so that they themselves, working people, become dependent on the government to supplement their income.
Well, most of those discount stores did the same thing. They created an enormous amount of jobs at minimum wage deals, and
so it seems like everybody has a job, but it's not really a job if you're not making enough to pay the car fare to get there.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. Listen to me. I don't disagree with any of that. I think a person works a fair amount of hours, should work and get paid a proper management. I don't disagree with that. But greed and industry, and when people when stores like Walmart and all those other stores started coming up, discount stores and all, everybody jumped into those jobs because there were a lot of jobs put out. You didn't have to take the job, my man. You didn't have to stand there and
because
say,
the union job that you used to have is now the unions have been busted for the most part.
The union's been busted because the government got involved in them. That's a fact.
Right.
And I can tell you that for.
And it's the same government.
Unions got involved
because they're having to supplement the income of workers being paid the minimum wage, or $15 an hour, or $20 an hour. Just ain't enough. So,
why should the economy be risen so high that $15? Why is the value of the dollar been cheapened so much? You understand? And when Eisenhower was president, the dollar was worth 86 cents, and you could go into a grocery store and take $1 and you could buy a lot of things. Okay, and I'll give you a good example. I was in Oklahoma on the land in the 70s, and I spent a lot of time out there while I sorted out a problem I had to sort out. And I was standing and I got to be friendly with it because I was living on a lawyer's ranch, and this guy was a great cattle rancher and a great lawyer, actually. And I got to know his neighbors, and I used to go hang out and shoot the brews with them. And I went over to this guy's place one day, and he's standing there shooting his cows. I said, my God, what are you doing, man? He said, let me tell you something. I bred these animals from scratch. And I'll be damned, he said, if I'm going to allow the government to come and pay me, let's say, $2 a pound when I know they're selling it in the store for $6. You understand?
So he cuts his own nose off to spite his face.
He said, I'll shoot these animals and give the meat to all the Indians and everybody else. I'll give it away, rather than be cheated like that. I'm not playing that game, because what happened when Nixon was president, if you sit down and think about this now, when you were a kid, gasoline was like 18, 20 cents a gallon. A loaf of bread was 20 cents.
Right.
And it went from 20 cents to 80 cents overnight because we made a deal with Russia for wheat. They gave the wheat to Russia rather than put it back in this country. But nobody looks at the whole picture here. Prices were inflated because the government instilled their input in the middle of all the economy. Prices on milk, bread, eggs, meat, everything went up, boom, which meant your economy's changing, which means you got to make more money to go to the store now, which means you got to make more money to live. Rents started going from bam, ba, bam, ba, bam.
Well, you know what's mixed in there? When we were kids, the boss made maybe 7 times more than the average worker. You know what the average boss makes now compared to the average?
1,000, 2,000.
Yeah, 450%, something like an amazing amount.
Absolutely ludicrous.
And I think that corporate greed is the biggest of the contributors to what's screwing us up.
Well, greed across the board, but greed is only allowed when the government allows it. You can't have greed unless somebody allows it to happen.
Yeah, but lobbyists preclude government from making decisions in the best interests of the people, because lobbyists from big business, and I'm thinking primarily a few little businesses like big farms, alcohol, timber, this, that, and the other thing, they're all going with open checkbooks to whoever it is that represents us, and not the least of which is the National Rifle Association.
Well, the National Rifle Association has been gotten away with murder for years. Yeah, that's it. You know, there's things that go on, and you know, you got to go again. There's such a much broader picture when it comes to arms and weapons and stuff like that. You know, you turn around in your head, you say, why are there so many guns on the street? And there's a very good reason for that, because this country isn't at war, and there's not even any conflicts going on, but they're still manufacturing weapons. What are you going to do with them?
Talking about that last night. That's what makes war so prevalent all over the world, is you sell them weapons, but if they don't fire them, they're not going to buy new weapons. They're not going to buy new ammo next year.
Let me tell you. I'll give you a great example of something that really, you know, it kind of made. Unless you were there, you would never really realize. When America went to war, went into Vietnam. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These soldiers are carrying World War II surplus equipment in swamps, desert. I mean, they never knew what it was like to fight war in those kind of conditions and weather conditions. And here's guys carrying these heavy M1 rifles that were obsolete. The weapons were obsolete. They were too heavy. The gear that they were carrying around was too heavy for where they were at. But it was dumped on them because they were emptying out the warehouses. You think they cared about the people that were utilizing it? Hell no.
No.
When they came out with lighter rifles, lighter weapons, lighter this, lighter that, things changed a lot differently. When they learned how to fight, nobody ever saw. I don't know if you've ever been in a monsoon. You ever been in a monsoon? Were you ever in Vietnam?
Had dubious pleasure. No, I didn't go to Vietnam.
Hey, let me tell you something. The rain rains sideways. You can't see your hand in front of your face.
It's like Florida at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, that's daily. That's a daily experience. Right. It could be sunnier than. I mean, when I lived in Florida, man, I couldn't believe that. If people used to tell me that, I'd say, "Get out of here," and I'd be driving down the street, and all of a sudden it'd be pouring rain. I said, "Oh, where does this come from?" Oh, that's the daily blessing that happens every day.
From 3 to 4.
That's right.
Every day in Florida.
That's exactly correct. Exactly correct. And I lived over on the west side. I loved the west side of Florida much better than the east side. I lived over in St. Petersburg, in the Tampa area.
Real close to where Peter Golenbach is, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, he and I were chatting. You know, I told him we should have a chat one day because he knows some. I mentioned some places in Tampa. He's, oh my God, you know, because I was down there. Conti was his young son was there, and you know, I was friends with Conti family. I had a lot of friends down there. There were a lot of good people down there. You know, and I went down to take care of them.
And they consider you to be a good person, too. That's nice.
Well, that's what they told me. I don't know. What could they like me hanging around? What could I tell you?
All right. Hey, listen, you're a joy to talk with. I so much enjoy your company, and let's keep doing it on a regular basis.
Whatever, my friend. You see, I love talking to open-minded people, you know, people that really understand what, and somebody looking at the big picture. You know, because people just don't look at they're so narrow-minded. People, you know, people are so schooled on sitting in front of a television watching the news. and they believe that's the truth of what's going on in the world. They don't realize that the news on television is there to win awards. They don't tell you anything. I could make 4 phone calls around the world in a day and get more news, real news and updates than I could ever get on television or newspaper. You know that?
I can imagine. What is it? What's the number one thing we're being not told at this particular moment?
They just don't. They don't tell the truth. They just don't want people to know what is really going on. That's called control.
Okay.
They don't want to. They want to control people. You know, it's no. Listen, we have a problem with certain drugs in this country, and the government's as much involved as anybody. They can blame this nationality, that, and that. The government's more involved than anybody, and they do it because it controls people.
Yeah. Well, what if they legalized heroin and prescribed it?
But it used to be. You used to be able to buy opiate drugs across the counter before the Harrison Act came in place. You could buy all that stuff across the counter for nothing, and there was no addiction, pal.
Right.
Like we see today.
Right.
You know,
well,
the Harrison Act. You know, people don't look at the history of the country. I asked you one time before, what was the first prohibition? Everybody thinks it was liquor.
marijuana.
No. 1914. Look up the Harrison Act. Look it up.
Okay.
And look up how many congressmen and senators were against it, and it still got passed. And that's where Big Pharma took over. You have big corporate. Big Pharma is a bad lock control in this country. It has done more harm to individuals than anything you can think of. It has killed more people than, certainly more than the mafia or anybody else ever thought about killing, by over-prescribing drugs to them.
Right. And getting
Look at the Harrison Act and educate yourself a little.
Okay. That'll be my assignment until next we meet.
So good talking to you. It really is. Great.
Right.
And Patriots going to win tomorrow, let me tell you.
I have passed on that tip to my betting friends. Let's put it. Now, my question, will they win and cover the spread?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I will.
You know, it could be a very high.
I'll consider myself an insider. How about that?
You have a great day, my friend.
I don't know what the baggage with that comes from, but so far it's been fun, and that's the name of the game. Thank you, Jack. And thanks for listening, everybody. I am the man with the gall of the man. Ralph Tyko, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Jack O'Halloran, he's got a little more gall than I have, I got to admit. Thank you, Jack. We'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.